Most people think Big Red means secretariat, but half a century before him, there was a racehorse so dominant that sports writers compared him to locomotives and legends instead of other horses. Man o' War was not just fast. He was a massive, awkward colt with a towering 16.2 hands frame, and a stride some swore reached 28 feet. His groom joked that he looked put together by a committee. Yet in an era when the best horses carried brutal lead weights, up to 138 pounds, sometimes spotting rivals 20 or even 30 pounds, Man o' War still won nearly every time. How good was he really, when the rules and numbers of his era barely make sense to modern eyes? The answer changes what you think you know about greatness. And it changes the measuring stick every champion since has chased. Man o' War entered the world on March 29, 1917, at Nursery Stud in Kentucky, a chestnut foal with a frame that seemed to defy the blueprints of the day. While most thoroughbred babies looked neat and balanced, this colt stood out for all the wrong reasons. He was tall and angular, with a high-set head, a long back and legs that seemed to go on forever. The farmhands joked that he looked like he had been assembled from spare parts. His future groom, Will Harbert, later said he was put together by a committee. But even as a youngster, something about him demanded a second look. At just a few months old, Man o' War was already a handful. He would buck and wheel in the paddock, tossing his head and testing fences, never content to stand still. He played rough with other colts, sometimes sending them running with a single kick. The stable boys noticed how he covered ground, an awkward bounding motion that did not match his gangly body. There were stories whispered around the barn that he could reach nearly 28 feet in a single stride, a number that lived more in legend than in any tape measure. What was certain, when he moved, the other foals seemed to shrink beside him. His conformation drew skeptical glances from old hands. He was coarse, with a thick neck and a deep chest, already hinting at the power that would one day carry him through 1.5 miles of dirt at full tilt. At maturity, he would stand 16.2 hands, taller than most of his rivals, and weigh in at over 1,100 pounds. Even as a foal, his appetite was legendary, polishing off 12 quarts of oats a day, 3 more than the average horse. Every morning, Will Harbert would find him waiting at the stall door, ears pricked, impatient for breakfast and for whatever came next. Yet for all his awkwardness, there was a sense of latent force in every move he made. When he galloped, the paddock fence seemed to rush toward him and then disappear beneath those long legs. The farm's old-timers, who had seen generations of foals grow up and fade away, began to wonder if this oddball might be something different. The colt's quirks, his high head, his rough play, his appetite, were not flaws. They were the raw materials of a prodigy that had not yet found his form. Even before he set hoof on a racetrack, Man o' War was already rewriting the rules for what greatness could look like. In the world Man o' War entered, a racehorse's greatness was measured not just by speed, but by what he carried to the finish line. Early 20th century racing secretaries, men like Walter S. Vosper, wielded the power to level the field. Their tool was weight, lead shot packed into saddle pads, added pound by pound for every victory, every display of dominance. The idea was simple: make the best horses work harder to win, and maybe the others could keep up. But the execution was punishing. A top juvenile like Man o' War was expected to tote 130 pounds or more before he had even finished his first season, while his rivals sometimes ran with 20 pounds less. That difference, the equivalent of a small child strapped to his back, was supposed to slow him down. It rarely did. The numbers tell the story. In 1919, Man o' War was assigned 130 pounds in the Hudson Stakes, an impost that would be unthinkable for a 2-year-old today. By the time he was 3, he shouldered 138 pounds in the Potomac handicap, spotting 24 pounds to the runner-up. For context, modern champions like Secretariat and Flightline rarely carried more than 126 pounds in their biggest races. Racing authorities now cap imposts to protect horses and preserve the illusion of fairness. But in Man o' War's day, the best ran with a target on their backs and a lead weight in their saddle. Every added pound has a cost. Experts estimate that for every extra 2 pounds carried over a mile, a horse loses about a length. Over the course of a race, that deficit multiplies. Biomechanically, the strain on tendons and joints grows with each stride. Yet Man o' War not only survived these burdens, he thrived under them. His raw times, when viewed without this context, seem impressive. But when you adjust for the weight he lugged, those performances leap off the chart. The numbers that follow in his record are not just statistics. They are evidence of a horse whose greatness cannot be measured by time alone. Each victory, each record, was won against the clock and the scale in a system designed to hold him back. That is why, to truly understand what Man o' War accomplished, the weight must always be part of the equation. In the summer of 1919, the racing world watched as a 2-year-old colt began to rewrite the rules of what a thoroughbred could do. Man o' War didn't just win, he overwhelmed. The first time out, he ran away from the field, and by midsummer his name was filling headlines from coast to coast. Race after race, he lined up with the best of his generation. Each time, he carried more weight than the others, sometimes as much as 130 pounds, while his rivals lugged far less. The difference did not slow him. Instead, he seemed to relish the challenge, surging to the front and never looking back. He entered 10 races that year and won 9 of them. Most days, he crossed the finish line with daylight to spare, his jockey easing him up long before the wire. In the United States Hotel Stakes at Saratoga, he beat Upset, his soon-to-be nemesis, by 1 length, giving away 15 pounds. In the Hopeful Stakes, he faced a full field and simply ran them off their feet, winning with his ears pricked. Even in the Stuyvesant handicap, where he spotted Yellow Hand 32 pounds, the result was the same. Man o' War in front, the rest trailing far behind. Crowds swelled wherever he appeared. At Aqueduct and Jamaica, turnstiles spun at record rates, with attendance numbers rivaling baseball's biggest games. Newspapers called him a terror, a phenomenon, and compared his dominance to the way Babe Ruth was changing baseball. Wagering totals doubled the usual take when his name was on the card, and fans pressed against railings, hoping to catch a glimpse of the chestnut comet. Reporters ran out of superlatives, describing him as an express train in a world of pushcarts. His success was so complete that handicappers scrambled to keep up, piling on more weight in a desperate attempt to make the races fair. But the more they added, the more he seemed to thrive. The public frenzy built with every win, and by the end of his 2-year-old season, Man o' War was not just a racehorse. He was a national sensation. The stage was set for a showdown that would test the limits of even his extraordinary abilities. August 13th, 1919. Saratoga's grandstand hummed with anticipation as Man o' War stepped onto the track for the Sanford Memorial Stakes. He was unbeaten, feared, and carrying 15 pounds more than most of his rivals, a burden that would have grounded lesser colts. But on this day, the story would veer off script. Races then began not with mechanized gates, but with a simple piece of tape stretched across the dirt. When the starter's arm dropped, chaos often followed, and this time it cost Man o' War dearly. As the tape snapped, the field lunged forward. Man o' War wheeled, caught off guard, and spun nearly sideways. By the time he found his stride, every other horse was already in full flight, and he trailed by several lengths before his first real step. Jockey Johnny Loftus tried to steady him, but the trouble was only beginning. On the backstretch, Man o' War found himself boxed in, hemmed between horses, with no room to run. Twice, Loftus angled for daylight, only to be closed off by rivals who knew their only hope was to keep the favourite trapped. Steward reports from that afternoon describe how he was pocketed again at the 3/8 pole, forced to check his momentum and swing wide around the turn. Each time he tried to accelerate, another wall of horseflesh blocked his path. Meanwhile, a colt named Upset, carrying 103 pounds, a full 15 less than Man o' War, was already clear. Upset's jockey, Willie Knapp, seized the advantage, setting a brisk pace and daring the field to catch him. Man o' War, finally free in the stretch, launched a furious rally. He closed the gap with every stride, eating up ground in the final furlong. The crowd's roar swelled as he bore down on Upset, his legs churning, his neck stretched to the limit. In the last eighth of a mile, Man o' War covered the ground in about 12 seconds, an impossible finish under the circumstances. At the wire, Upset held on by half a length. Loftus later shouldered the blame, admitting, "My ride caused the loss." The stewards found no foul play, only the sharp tactics of rivals exploiting the old tape start and the heavy weight. For Man o' War, it was the only defeat of his career. Yet the legend only grew. The loss proved that even when luck, weight, and tactics conspired against him, Man o' War could nearly erase the impossible. His resilience that day, turning disaster into a near miracle, cemented his status not as a fragile champion, but as something closer to invincible. Samuel Riddle sat atop the racing world with the most feared colt of his era. Yet when the Kentucky Derby rolled around in May of 1920, Man o' War stayed home. Riddle's refusal was not born of arrogance or oversight. He believed that forcing a 3-year-old to run 1.25 miles so early in the season was reckless, especially on the hard, unfamiliar dirt of Churchill Downs. In his view, the Derby was a Western test, one that risked breaking down young horses before they had fully matured. Letters from Riddle to his trainers preserved in racing archives reveal a man unmoved by public pressure. He wrote bluntly that the Derby grinds colts, and he had no intention of shipping his prized chestnut west just to satisfy the press or the crowd. This stance baffled and infuriated the racing establishment. Rival owners lobbied him to reconsider, and sports writers accused him of robbing the sport of its greatest showdown. The New York Times ran columns questioning whether a true champion could claim greatness without conquering the Derby. Jockeys and trainers whispered their frustrations at the tracks in New York, but Riddle held firm. For him, the right path was the one that protected his horse, not the one that chased headlines. Instead, Man o' War's campaign was charted through the East, Preakness at Pimlico, Belmont at Belmont Park, and the storied summer meets at Saratoga and Aqueduct. Each race was chosen for its surface, timing, and tradition, not for the lure of a Triple Crown, which in 1920 was not yet the icon it would become. The decision meant Man o' War would never have the chance to sweep all 3 jewels, leaving a permanent gap in his record. Yet for Riddle, the missing Derby win was a mark of stewardship, not weakness. He watched his colt dominate every race he entered, carrying crushing weights and shattering records, while the Derby remained a distant, untaken risk, one he never regretted leaving behind. In May 1920, the Preakness Stakes at Pimlico brought together the best 3-year-olds in the country. Man o' War broke sharply, settled into his high, pounding stride, and took command before the far turn. Jockey Clarence Cummer, perched quietly above that massive chestnut frame, barely moved his hands as the colt opened up daylight. The final time was 1 minute 51 3/5 seconds for 1 mile and 3/16, and it landed just shy of the track record. He finished 1.5 lengths clear. Even with more in the tank, he was never threatened. But the Preakness was just a warm-up. The Belmont Stakes held that June at 1 mile and 3/8 offered the purest test of speed against the clock. Only one other horse dared to enter, and after a scratch, Man o' War stood alone at the starting line in a walkover, a rare event where a champion has no rivals. The crowd at Belmont Park watched as Kuma let him roll, then eased him up well before the finish. Man o' War still crossed the wire 20 lengths ahead of where any other horse would have been, setting a new world record of 2 minutes 14 1/5 seconds for the distance. The time stood for years, even though he was never asked for his full effort. Race charts from that day show the splits. The first mile in a brisk 1 minute 38 and change, then a final 3/8 run almost on cruise control. Official timing confirmed the feat. Trackmen and sports writers agreed he was not racing other horses, he was racing the stopwatch. Even in victory, Kuma's main job was to keep him from running up the score too high and risking injury. The colt's stride, long, relentless and rhythmic, ate up the ground, and the only real question was how fast he could have gone if pushed. These performances did not just break records, they redefined what was possible. Man o' War's ceiling remained unknown. He could demolish a field or run alone against the clock, and the outcome was the same, a margin that left no doubt, and a time that forced the racing world to reconsider the limits of speed. October 20th, 1920. The Potomac Handicap at Havre de Grace did not just ask a question of Man o' War, it set a challenge that bordered on the absurd. The official scale listed his burden at 138 pounds. For a 3-year-old, that number stood alone in the record books. Racing secretaries had run out of ways to slow him down, so they turned to lead. The next closest horse, Wild Air, carried 24 pounds less. Paul Jones, the year's Kentucky Derby winner, got a 20-pound head start. In modern terms, it is the difference between running free and hauling a small child on your back. Most horses buckle under that kind of load. Tendons strain, muscles tire, and the stride shortens with every step. But when the barrier lifted, Man o' War powered to the front with his usual violence, his stride pounding out a rhythm that ignored the laws of physics and fairness alike. The field tried to keep up, but the weight did its work. Wild Air and Paul Jones closed in the final furlong, their lighter frames eating into the margin. For a moment, it looked as if the experiment might finally catch up with him. Yet Man o' War refused to yield. He drove home in 1 minute 44 4/5 seconds for the mile and a 16th, a new track record, set while giving away at least 2 seconds worth of weight. The chart called it 1.5 lengths at the wire, but the numbers do not tell the story. Every stride was a feat of engineering, joints and bone-absorbing punishment that would have crippled ordinary horses. Racing historians still marvel at the biomechanics. An animal weighing 1,125 pounds, forced to carry more than 12% of his own body weight, running faster than any horse had ever gone at that track, seems practically astonishing. The Potomac Handicap became the gold standard for what a thoroughbred could endure. Experts estimate that every 2 pounds slows a horse by about a length over a mile, meaning Man o' War's performance, adjusted for weight, vaults into the realm of the impossible. The race did not just prove his speed or his stamina, it revealed a machine built to defy the handicapper's best efforts. After Potomac, there was nowhere left for the weight men to go. The numbers had lost their power. Man o' War had beaten the scale itself. October 12th, 1920, at Kenilworth Park in Windsor, Ontario, drew the eyes of the sporting world for a contest that outgrew even its $80,000 purse. This was the race newspapers called the Race of the Century, a head-to-head between two champions, Man o' War, the undefeated Titan of the East, and Sir Barton, the pride of Canada and the first horse to sweep the newly named Triple Crown just a year before. The anticipation was electric. No ordinary stakes race, this was a match staged and promoted for months with contracts signed and crowds swelling to the tens of thousands. Special trains brought fans from Detroit, Toronto, and in New York. The grandstand overflowed, and betting slips changed hands at a feverish pace. Sir Barton arrived as the reigning king, but questions hung in the air. He had been a workhorse, tough and consistent, but he had never faced a rival like this. Man o' War, fresh off a string of record-shattering wins, entered the paddock with the confidence of a creature who had never truly been tested. The two horses paraded before the crowd, their handlers tense, the noise rising with every step. When the barrier lifted, Sir Barton broke fast, seizing the lead into the first turn. For a moment, the crowd believed in the upset. But Man o' War's stride was relentless, his head high and his muscles coiled. Down the backstretch, he drew alongside, then passed with a power that made the rest of the field irrelevant. By the final furlong, Sir Barton's challenge had evaporated. Man o' War surged away, lengthening his margin with every stride. At the wire, the gap was 7 lengths, an eternity in a match race. The clock stopped at 2 minutes and 3 seconds for the mile and a quarter, a new track record despite the heavy going. That afternoon did more than crown a champion. Sir Barton never won another race. His connections, battered by defeat and the cost of the spectacle, retired him soon after. Man o' War's owners collected the richest purse in North American racing to that point, $80,000. But the true prize was something less tangible. The sense that no horse of his era, not even a Triple Crown winner, could touch him. The myth of Man o' War, already immense, now towered over the sport. Trying to compare Man o' War's performances to modern champions is a puzzle that has kept analysts busy for decades. The raw numbers from his era, times, margins, weights, do not translate cleanly to today's scorecards. Dirt tracks in 1920 were rougher, stopwatches less precise, and the weight assignments were almost brutal. To bridge the gap, modern handicappers have turned to retroactive speed figures, applying formulas like Timeform and Bayer to estimate just how fast he really was. The process starts with the race charts. Analysts pore over old records, adjusting for the weight Man o' War carried, often 130, 135, or even 138 pounds, using formulas that assign a time penalty for every extra pound. For example, some models subtract about 1/5 of a second per pound over a mile, then factor in track conditions and the quality of competition. The numbers are then compared to known benchmarks. Frankel's peak time form rating of 147, Secretariat's estimated 144, Flightline's Bayer of 126. Most horses from Man o' War's era do not survive this kind of scrutiny, but his record bends the numbers. Some of the most respected analysts, working from the best available data, put Man o' War's adjusted rating at 150 or higher. That is not just good, it is off the charts. Even with conservative adjustments, his Potomac handicap run under 138 pounds and his world record Belmont time stand up to any modern performance. The caveat is the uncertainty. Track variants from a century ago are an educated guess, and old timing methods leave room for debate. But the consensus holds. If you run the numbers straight, Man o' War is not just in the conversation, he is at the top of the list. In the end, retro analytics supply a hard metric for a legend. They do not erase the quirks of his era, but they make it possible to measure his feats against the best from any generation. The math, for once, matches the myth. Man o' War's numbers are as overwhelming as the stories. Secretariat's legend begins with a stride measured at 31 feet, longer than any in recorded racing history. His running style was poetry in motion, a closer who would relax at the back, then sweep past rivals in the final turn, his chestnut frame gliding almost without effort. Veterinarians later discovered his heart weighed 22 pounds, nearly twice the average, fueling that relentless late kick. Man o' War, by contrast, was a force of nature unleashed from the break. He attacked the track with a high, pounding action, ears pinned, muscles coiled, daring anyone to catch him. His stride, estimated at 28 feet, wasn't about floating, it was about crushing. Where Secretariat's greatness looked effortless, Man o' War's was raw and untamed, a front-runner who imposed his will from the first stride. Both horses redefined perfection, but in opposite forms: Secretariat's grace against the clock, Man o' War's violence against the world. Two champions, two templates for the impossible. Flightline electrified the racing world in 2022, posting a 126 Bayer speed figure, one of the highest ever recorded in the modern era. His 6 flawless starts, each a showcase of raw acceleration and authority, had fans and analysts scrambling for superlatives. But the numbers alone do not tell the full story. Flightline's brief, carefully managed campaign stands in stark contrast to the demands placed on horses a century ago. While today's champions are pampered, spaced out over months between races, Man o' War ran 21 times in just 2 seasons. Back then, it was not unusual for a colt to race on consecutive days, sometimes with little rest and few excuses. The durability expected and delivered was at a level modern thoroughbreds rarely approach. The Bayer scale rewards brilliance, but it cannot measure the grind, the repeated strain, the recovery, the resilience. Flightline's 6 perfect races are a marvel of modern training. Man o' War's relentless schedule, his ability to dominate again and again under crushing weights, sets a standard that no single number can capture. Citation's record sparkles on paper: 16 consecutive wins in 1948, a Triple Crown, and a Hall of Fame career that stretched over 3 seasons. He moved with the cool assurance of a professional, dispatching his rivals in small fields, often as a heavy favorite. But the numbers behind his streak tell a subtler story. In race after race, Citation carried 126 pounds or less, rarely burdened by the lead-filled pads that defined Man o' War's era. The average field size shrank as his dominance grew, with some victories coming against only 2 or 3 others. His greatest rival, Coaltown, was a stablemate, and in several starts, Citation faced little more than token opposition. The difference in imposts is stark. While Citation's heaviest assignments matched today's standards, Man o' War was routinely asked to shoulder 130, 135, even 138 pounds, conceding entire stone blocks to his challengers. The comparison does not diminish Citation's brilliance, but it throws into sharp relief what separated Man o' War from even the most relentless winners. Not just how many he beat, but what he was asked to carry to do it. After the roar of the grandstands faded, Man o' War's influence only deepened. At Faraway Farm, he sired 381 foals, more than half of them winners, and 62 good enough to claim stakes races. Among them stood War Admiral, the 1937 Triple Crown champion, whose speed and fire recalled his father's best days. The blood ran even deeper. Man o' War's daughters and sons spread his legacy through generations, shaping the American thoroughbred. His line produced Seabiscuit, the Depression-era underdog who captured the nation's imagination, and Crusader, Horse of the Year, in 1926. Breeders sought out Man o' War's offspring, hoping to bottle a little of that raw power for their own stables. His descendants dominated the classics, their names filling pedigrees and sales catalogues for decades. Through War Admiral and Seabiscuit, Man o' War's story wove itself into the fabric of American racing, not just as a champion on the track, but as the architect of a dynasty that set the standard for what a racehorse could become. A century later, no horse has matched the demands Man o' War faced, carrying up to 138 pounds, shattering records, and rewriting the standards for greatness. As modern racing trends toward lighter imposts and fewer starts, the benchmark he set becomes more distant, not less. Greatness isn't just measured in speed, but in the weight history asks you to carry. Some legends, it seems, outrun even time itself. Let me know your take in the comments below.